Why make the Khaenri'ahns immortal? Why take an entire civilization that you deem to have committed arrogation, to have been a threat to you, and make it so that they will always be around? Seems counterproductive, really. Wouldn't it be better if Celestia had just taken their names off the census for good? Well, perhaps they couldn't. They may not be as all-powerful as we have been made to think. Maybe even Celestia needs to play by the rules of Tivat. First of all, we need to remember that we actually don't know if immortality was the desired effect for the curse. Khaenri'ah as a whole was cursed, but we can split the effects out of that fact as pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns becoming immortal and non-pure-blooded ones becoming monsters alongside the people of the Seven that lived in the underground nation. And here I use the word monsters as opposed to hilichurls because all the monstrous creatures of the Abyss Order were Khaenri'ahns once. So the effects may have varied depending on how closely related they were to this original pure-blooded lineage, which would actually suggest that they were all afflicted by the same curse. This lineage might have simply possessed some sort of resistance that prevented them from becoming monsters. This transformation into hilichurls is known as the Curse of the Wilderness, and it actually predates the Cataclysm for 500 years at least, meaning these older hilichurls were likely the people of the previous civilization Celestia had destroyed. Which makes it seem like the Curse of the Wilderness is a standard procedure for getting rid of pesky humans who get too rowdy, so it would make sense for it to also be cast on Khaenri'ah, only for it to backfire by actually making the purebloods immortal. Where does this leave the Abyss Order monsters though? Well, if we look at Khaenri'ah, we know that it was supposedly 50% Khaenri'ahn and still got turned into a hilichurl. What would have happened if he was, say, 75% Khaenri'ahn? Could he have become an Abyss Mage? Abyss Mages seem to be the grunts of the Abyss Order. Lectors and Heralds outrank them, for instance, but they may all have been Abyss Mages at some point. We do know that hilichurls also seem to evolve, as Summichurls are the oldest among them, so the Abyss monsters might be the result of the Curse of the Wilderness running its due course while being tampered with by this unspecified special trait pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns possessed, along with their affinity for the Abyss. Maybe. If you look at these three separate effects, it kinda seems like different levels of severity of this one same curse, because hilichurls are also immortal. We have seen them approach the end of their life cycle and seek out the chasm so that they could die with some comfort. But it wasn't an actual death, it was simply erosion taken to an extreme which basically rendered them empty husks. So the Curse of the Wilderness, in its OG state, would remove one's mental faculties, turn them into monsters, and make them immortal. The immortality would keep these poor sods around, but between their limited brain functions and erosion, they wouldn't be a nuisance for all that long, at least not from Celestia's POV. The curse that afflicted monsters of the Abyss would run the same course, but failed to remove the human-like brain power the accursed previously possessed, making them a little bit more troublesome. Here I want to point out that the progression of the curse probably varies from individual to individual though, as the Lector, for instance, seems to be a lot more coherent than a Black Serpent Knight. You know, the thing Halfdan became, and Dane was very surprised he had managed to keep his memories. This might also be on account of different individuals being more or less related to the pure-blooded lineage, but that's all speculation. Regardless, we still have a monsterification going on and immortality. And at the last level, we have the pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns, who didn't become monsters or lose brain power, but simply became immortal. Between each of these steps, one effect of the Curse of the Wilderness is removed. I want to make it very clear that at no point has it been confirmed that this is all the same curse. But if anything, this intermediary step of sorts kinda lends some credence to that idea. So, assuming that it is the same one, the purpose seems quite clear. Again, hilichurls will not be very problematic after a while. But still, why not just straight up kill them? Did Celestia hate them so much it wanted them to suffer forever? Erosion seems to really leave pretty much nothing behind after a while, so I don't think they would be suffering forever even if that was the point. How can you suffer without a proper mind and a body? So there might have been a different reason why Celestia opted for the curse instead. And I have already told you what my theory is, actually. Erosion. Well, that and karma. Think about it for a second. There is a traveler that is ever growing more powerful running around Tivat and preparing to fistfight God if they must. There's the twin of said traveler who possesses powers that are alien to this world, and oh, did I mention an army? And then there is also the Tsaritsa and her Harbingers and the Fatui, so there's another army. On top of that, there's Nicole, a very powerful witch who seems to be on the traveler's side if her interaction with them at the end of Inversion of Genesis is any indication, along with perhaps some more members of Exant Circle. You'd think Celestia would want to step in and stop all of these parties before they have a chance to become more powerful and maybe even form an alliance with each other. But they haven't, because they are likely not even aware of it. Nahida told us that Heavenly Principles has not been seen ever since her fight with the twins, 500 years prior. A fight that would have taken place immediately after the Cataclysm, or perhaps even during it. Her red boxes can be seen floating around the canopy of Irminsul, and Clother spoke to his son about the red skies, so it is a safe bet to say that she more than likely was involved in the war proper. And after that, she might have decided to slip it off. No, seriously. Heavenly Principles might not be immune to the effects of erosion and karma, and thus might have needed to slumber away after the fact to halt them. Seems like a stretch? Well, let us try to define erosion and karma, because these two might actually be two sides of the same coin, and then it will all make sense. Erosion is something that happens naturally over time, leading one to lose their memories, sense of self, and consciousness. In a way, it makes beings go kind of insane, like what happened with Ajdaha. This phenomenon is, as far as we know, inescapable. It's the reason why Aid sought to create her puppet and retreat into the plane of Euthymia, as well as one of the reasons why Morak stepped down as an Archon. And it might also be the reason why Barbatus slumbers away for so long. The Anemo Archon has been known to disappear for centuries at a time. If asked about it, he would tell you that it is because ruling a free nation is a paradox and that he has no wish of doing anything that would disrupt his people's freedom. And that much might be true, but he may also be trying to prolong his lifespan. We know he was originally a wind spirit, but assumed his current form around 2,600 years ago, during the Archon War. That's not a negligible age, but is it enough to make erosion such a pressing matter? Different beings seem to have different levels of susceptibility to it. For instance, Hilichurls and humans seem to only require a few hundred years to lose themselves. Think about the Hilichurls from the Chasm and even Clother himself, while Zhongli is still mostly fine despite being 6,000 years old. Different gods have different origins and natures, so they likely also have different degrees of resistance to erosion, meaning we can't really assume that Venti is fine just because Zhongli is. Still, he seems fine, but the Anemo Archon may be thinking ahead and preventing erosion from setting in the first place. He may be over 2 millennia old, but if his total time awake only adds up to a few hundred years, then he might only be experiencing the erosion that corresponds to that time span. As meditation is meant to preserve our mind, Venti may have simply gone about it in a different way. If you are not conscious, can your consciousness even be eroded? And then there is karma. This is a concept that is always brought up in the context of the Yakshas. They were rallied by Rax Lapis to fight against the monstrous manifestations of the fallen gods' hatred. All of this hatred corrupts them and slowly destroys their souls and sanity. We know the Sliding Darius to succumb to a karmic debt, Bonanos and Menogias to kill each other and in their sanity, and most interesting of all, Volsatius to lose his memories and sanity. So it sounds like karma erodes one's sanity, sense of self, memories, and even consciousness. It's like a condensed form of erosion, if you will, as it acts much faster. That said, while erosion is passive and inevitable, karma stems from one's own actions. Like I said, this phenomenon is only ever really brought up regarding the Yakshas, but they aren't the only ones who can suffer from it. In fact, they are the most resistant to it. Zhao keeps to himself because his mere presence is enough to have his karmic debt rub off on humans, who are much more fragile. Even the other Adepti, although able to withstand more, tend to steer clear for most of the time. Karma is like a plague that spreads to everything it touches. With possibly two exceptions. The Traveler's presence actually alleviates Zhao's pain, likely due to their purification abilities. And if they can do it, then there is a fair chance their ceiling can too. But back to the point at hand, we need to discuss what can and cannot give one karmic debt. Is the only way to contract it to kill the manifestations of slain gods, or does the act of killing itself taint one's soul? The gods' hatred and wrath are always brought up, so it might not have to do with their divine status, but with the emotions they were feeling while being slain in the act of killing itself. Zhao talks about his eons of slaughter, but we know he hasn't taken the lives of only these manifestations. Did he get karma from everything else? Could he get karmic debt from killing humans? Mortals cannot compare to the divine, they don't possess the same amount of power, so killing one might not pack the punch that killing a god would. But what if you were to kill an entire nation? Hundreds, maybe thousands of people would not have been feeling happy feelings as they watch you destroy everything they own and are. That's a lot of potential karma that would compound on top of any existing erosion. It's likely something Celestia wouldn't want to deal with. The Curse of Wilderness and its variations may be a cop-out. It still takes care of the problem, well, when functioning properly, but it doesn't require the caster to actually take any lives. If it's erosion that quote-unquote kills them, then their blood would not be on Celestia's hands and does not increase their own erosion. Alright, so now you may have two questions. One, if Celestia didn't kill them and didn't get eroded as a result, why even go into hibernation afterwards? And two, can descenders even suffer erosion? Listen, if everything so far has been speculation, this is even more so keep that in mind. That said, we need to try and figure out who Celestia is. The first person who comes to mind is, naturally, Heavenly Principles. But she isn't the only god up there, or at least she shouldn't be. In a manga, we can see that an ascended Vanessa is still dutifully keeping watch over Mondstadt, so presumably all the ascended Allogene should be in the floating island in the sky as well. But we have never actually seen any of them, which might actually not be that weird. The shot we got of Celestia makes it look like a panopticon, which is a prison, so ascended gods might not enjoy a lot of freedom. If they weren't allowed to make an appearance pre-cataclysm, we have no reason to believe that it would change during or post-cataclysm. What about the Descender gods though? Unless there is a third entity that has never even been mentioned before, Celestia is currently under the rule of either the Primordial One or the second who came. We have some evidence pointing either way. If Fence is in charge, its shades might still be around, and the Sustainer might be one of them. The stone tablet before Sun and Moon mentions the second throne as a single individual, but the artifact set Flowers of Paradise Lost talk about invaders, plural. So the Sustainer could be the second who came herself, a companion of this god, or even their shade. She could be anyone. As a result, for the time being, we really cannot say for sure how many alien gods reside in Celestia. The Fatui are keeping tabs on 4 Descenders, the Sustainer among them, but we know that the Abyss sibling is or was originally a Descender, and yet isn't counted as such. And the Traveler themselves are a Descender and not associated with Celestia, so who is to say that the 2 remaining mystery beings are? Still, the Sustainer seems to be Celestia's champion at the very least. Both Nahida and Dottore believe she would be the one to interfere if the noses were destroyed. She was the one to intercept the twins, and again, she was part of the war. So when I speak of Celestia, it's her and her alone I'm talking about. There's a fair chance she was the one to cast the curse, and there's also a fair chance she was the one to kill off the fallen Archons. The Archon War was a bloody era, but as far as we know, all-out war did not break again until the Cataclysm, which makes the death of 5 of the original 7 Archons pretty weird. Of this, Makoto was confirmed to have died during the Cataclysm, while Rukkhadevata died in defense of Irminsul during the same time period, but not as a direct consequence of the war. And then we have the Tsaritsa, who Venti claims to have known very well in the past, but according to him, that fact changed 500 years ago. We know the Cryo-Archon's heart turned cold, so that's what he's referring to when he says he no longer knows her. But the timeline implies she was around pre-Cataclysm, so either she was alive but simply not an Archon, or the OG Cryo-Archon has to have died before the whole Khaenri'ahn debacle. So that leaves 2 unaccounted for deaths, the Hydro and Pyro Archons, who are likely to have met their demise alongside Makoto in the Cataclysm. Granted, the current Pyro Archon could be Murata, who was already around during Vanessa's time. Actually, to be more accurate, she was around centuries before that time, meaning that would put her back nearly 2000 years at the end of the Archon War. So either there was a Pyro Archon that died very quickly and was replaced with Murata, or this Murata is dead and there's a new Pyro Archon now. I'm kinda expecting her to be dead because I'm convinced that Hoyoverse says it out for every Murata. So if we roll with that assumption, we have 3 Archons. Listen, I know Khaenri'ah had a lot of technology that is still functional to this day. They had Rhine-Daughter and the power of Chemia. They had the Abyss Twin with their light element and likely already their abyssal powers. And there is also whatever Dane wields. Fighting this nation would not have been child's play. But would they really be able to kill off 3 gods? We also know Rhine-Daughter's monsters were plaguing Tevat even before Barbatos and Makoto joined the fight in Khaenri'ah, as A was left behind under the guise of protecting Inazuma from these beasts, and Venti and Valen would have presumably battled during before the war. So Khaenri'ah's army could have been scattered from the get-go. Maybe Gold wasn't even a direct participant in the first place. So it might actually make more sense for it to have been the Sustainer who took them out. Why would she do that though? Aren't they on the same side? Well, it often feels like the Archon's relationship with Celestia is more so one of forced subservience than allegiance. Venti was visibly fearful of them. Yes, them, we can see several silhouettes in his memory, we just don't have names for them. And this was all the way back during Vanessa's time, when the Cataclysm was still centuries in the future. And Nahida literally used the fear the name Heavenly Principles evokes to get Dottore to back off. The dynamic between these 2 groups is strained to be sure, and this dislike might go both ways. Celestia didn't intercede to stop the shedding of divine blood during the Archon War. In fact, they were almost surely the ones to incentivize it. So who's to say they wouldn't get rid of subpar Archons? And if the Sustainer did take out the original Hydro, Pyro, and Electro Archons, it would explain why Fossil Ors is so obsessed with appearing perfect in the eyes of the Divine. She doesn't want to be next. And killing 3 Archons, or even 2, if you believe Murat is still out there, could very well be enough to inflict a hefty dose of karmic debt on the Sustainer, hence the need to reduce the damage she had to take by resorting to the curse, and the need for the 500-year-long and still counting power nap. And regardless of her being the primordial one, the second who came, a shade, or something in between, it doesn't change the fact that she is ancient, much older than any Tivatin god or elemental being could ever dream of being. So all the karma would compound on top of an already massive amount of erosion. Because yeah, I do believe the Senders can fall prey to the rule of Tivat. They are just much more resilient in some aspects and perhaps much more vulnerable in others. Let us take the twins as a frame of reference for the Descenders because that's literally the only one we have, despite them likely not being the same kind of creature the Sustainer is. The Traveler likely arrived in Tevat already asleep, maybe as a consequence of their form of travel. Their twin awoke first and went out to play royalty in Khaenri'ah, having only gone back for their sibling right before the Sustainer interceded. After that fight, the Traveler was still then left to slumber for another 500 years. So if erosion really cannot affect you while unconscious, then there is really no reason for it to affect the Traveler, as they have basically only been awake for the time they spent traveling with Paimon. The Abyss sibling, however, has been awake for a couple hundred years at the very least. Part of that time was also spent in the Abyss, where time flows much faster. In fact, we know that 1 day in Tevat equals 1 month in the Abyss, so the Abyss twin might have actually been around for much longer, if you consider that. However, the Abyss might technically not be part of Tevat, and therefore erosion might not apply within it. One way or another, the twins are likely not human, so a few centuries in Tevat might not cause them too much damage either way. Thus, unfortunately, they cannot definitively answer the question of whether the Senders can suffer erosion, unless you want to consider the Abyss twins' called attitudes, so different from what both the Traveler and Dane seem to remember, as a sign of this phenomena. But that's a whole other can of worms without any evidence to back it up, so we shall not open it today. However, we have seen the Traveler be affected by other wonky things in Tevat. They have increased elemental resistance like Vision Wielders, which makes them able to withstand Withering Zones, for instance. But they are also weirdly sensitive to all sorts of divine energies. They took 1 whiff of Borneal incense and were out for the count, immediately connected to Irminsul despite it taking most researchers years to be able to do such a thing. And back in Inazuma, when they faced Scaramouche, they were so angry that a black aura formed around them. It reminds me of the effects that Tatarigami has on some enemies, so this could have been Orobachi's wrath reacting to the Travelers. After the Tenshukaku's incident and Signora's death, they also experienced a weird headache, which distorted the way they saw the world around them. This completely disappeared after the Shogun attacked, so they could have been feeling this god's bloodthirst and killing intent, another example of them reacting weirdly to the divine. So it's not a matter of whether Tevat can affect the Senders, just a matter of what within this world can. Is the idea that erosion and karmic death can affect the celestial gods so outlandish then? I don't think so. And besides, it might actually explain Celestia's sudden shift in alignment. In the time before the Second Hokage made their arrival, Phanes and its shades were good. They cared for their people, gave them everything they needed, and guided them. But after the war, they banned the people of Enkanomiya from returning to the surface, stopped communicating with humans, with the exception of Issaroth for a while at least, and started destroying civilizations. That's a complete moral 180. This change could be explained away by a new management of Celestia, as in, it could be that the Second Hokage won and it had vastly different views on what a god should act like. But for reasons I explained in great detail in my Carry Bear analysis video, which I will link up in the cards and in the description, I personally believe that Phanes won. And erosion could be a very solid explanation for its behavioral change. It and its shades were locked in a 40-year-long war and emerged changed. If bloodshed, especially of gods, creates karmic debt, which in turn erodes one's entire being, then this war could have been a fast track for insanity and Celestia's current attitude. So by the time the cataclysm rolled around, they might have wanted to avoid any more additional erosion. The Sustainer, being the only active Celestial god we know of, could even indicate the others were eroded to the point of no return, or are even taking turns being awake and in charge to extend their rule. But that's all speculation, so I will leave it up to you to decide whether you believe in it or not. Anyway, this spiraled out of control and got too long, so even I am currently experiencing erosion, so I'll take my leave for now. My name is Blue, and I'll see you again soon. Safe journey, travelers!